Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the MORryde X-Factor Crossmember here on our 2023 Palomino Puma Unleashed fifth wheel toy hauler. If you experience a lot of sway with your trailer, especially when you're going down the highway from those heavy crosswinds, or while you're just trying to make a turn with your trailer, then adding in a crossmember for MORryde is going to give you a much more stabilized base here. So what's really happening a lot of the time is we always think about how we're going to load our trailer so that we have the correct pin or tongue weight, but we don't always think about what the weight's going to be from side to side inside of our trailer. A lot of times the manufacturer is placing an entire slide running down one whole side, and that's usually holding our kitchenette, so that's our fridge, our dining table, probably also all of our cabinetry along with our oven. And that's kind of a lot of weight just on one side, when on the other side all you have is a little couch to kind of even out that balance there. So adding in more, something to stabilize the frame rails so it's not leaning so much to one side and help pull it back so that both frame rails are centered and parallel with each other instead of starting to twist just from all of that weight is going to give you a much more stabilized ride quality. Now there are a couple of different options when it comes to these, and the placement of them is somewhat important with this. Now MORryde, of course, is going to want you to do it on every single hanger, so that way you can get the best out of it, but that's not always an option on some trailers. So with us today, we installed a comfort ride system from Roadmaster on here, and unfortunately the slipper spring box doesn't have a way for us to attach our brackets on like we have right here. So this one is the standard, and this just has a bracket that's going to sit up against our hanger. We'll have our bolt that runs through our leaf spring into it, and that's going to bolt down, and then we're going to have a couple of bolts with a little shackle running across it. Now there are other options with that, so if you did have a MORryde equalizer, whether that's the some of the different versions of it, they've got different attachment points for that that'll actually link right up directly to the equalizer, and then there's ones that are going to go around it just like our standard one. Now, if you have a drop axle and maybe you need just a little bit more clearance, there is another version of this specific bracket right here that gives you an extra 3 inches of clearance. It'll drop down. That way you don't have to sit there and try and fight. Maybe you got some wiring or gas lines or something else in the way and you just really can't get that standard one in because there's not enough room. So there's a fit for you regardless of what you have going on, unless your equalizer is a little bit different, like in our case with the Roadmaster Comfort Ride system. But with all that being said, this is something that you can easily do at home. Typically, you're not even going to have to lift up the trailer. You're really just popping a single bolt out and then adding on a couple of brackets and stuff like that, unless you're doing the upgraded equalizer version, which on that, typically you're just popping off a back plate and bolting it right into it. So, like I said, I do think you can do this at home, but you will need a torque wrench to do so. Something you could pick up at your local auto parts store, typically just for free. Most of them will typically have some kind of rental program, so that way you're not spending extra money after you already went out and purchased all this stuff. But if you feel like this might just be a bit above what you want to do, or you just don't have the time to do so, then please feel free to reach out and use our dealer locator. You can enter in your zip code and find a shop near you to get it professionally installed. Now, if you are wanting to do this yourself, then stick around and I'll walk you through the process. We're already doing an install that's going to require us to remove our suspension, so now's the best time for us to actually install our crossmember. Typically you're going to see either just a standard hanger bolt or a wet bolt, just like this one right here, where it's got the little grease zerk fitting on it. And these are going to be pressed into your hanger. If you look at the hanger real closely, there's little teeth marks all throughout that hole there because there's splines cut into the bolt right under the head here. And that prevents the bolt from moving and only allows the leaf spring inside to move back and forth. We don't want this spinning out because what will happen is it'll force this hole open wider and wider and wider until it eats away the rest of the metal, because there's a little bit of movement in there, and that'll just keep rattling and rattling until something eventually gives on it or it binds up and then snaps. So to get these out, what you'll typically need to do is put a wrench, and now in most cases it's going to be 13/16. You'd put a wrench on that head right there, make sure that that can't spin at all, take the nut off on the back side, and then from there we're going to hammer it out. So what I'll do is I'll hammer on the thread side. Now if this is one we're going to be replacing, I'll hammer right onto it. If this is one we're going to be reusing again, I'll throw a nut I don't care about on there and then hammer it out the rest of the way. Now you might find you get it most of the way out and then it gets pinched, so you might want to also have a punch with you. That way you can stick it through and poke it out the rest of the way using your hammer. But once we have it all open, we want to make sure that we are switching over to a bronze bushing. It's not included in this kit, but they do give you the wet bolts, so you need to make sure that you purchase that separately. I've already got mine pressed into my leaf spring here, so my next step is going to be slotting in my bolt. Now once we get this bolt in place, we want to make sure that we hammer it back in so those teeth bite into our hanger. And to do so, we're going to want to have a socket. I typically use a 9/16 socket to hammer it in. I just keep this to the side because, as you can see, it's all smashed up at this point. But this is going to help protect us from hitting our grease zerk fitting and potentially breaking it off. Now you'll see you'll get to a point where it doesn't want to bite in enough. If you get to that point, that's where I'll come on the back side with my nut and try to draw that back in. Now with ours being a little bit longer, it's not really going to have anything to press against, so we'll have to put our bracket in place first. So that's this guy in your kit. There's going to be one that's larger, and one that's a little bit smaller, because we'll have an inner brace and then an outer brace that'll sleeve right over that. So you want to make sure that you note which side has a smaller bracket and which has the bigger one. That way when you go to put up the cross members, it's not going to be mix and match and not fit right. With that, we're going to have these longer gold bolts. We'll pass through, put on a spacer, and then we're going to have this bracket that's going to sit across from it and match up. And we'll do the same thing on that other side. We can thread on our flange nuts. We don't need to go crazy tight just yet. I'm going to have a little bit of wiggle room before I torque this down, because getting the center section in place, you sometimes find that these hangers aren't exactly perfect across from each other. Then we will have this spacer. It's going to pop on the end of our bolt, and that's what's going to suck up the rest of that length there. After that is our flange nut. Now, our MORryde system tells us that they want red Loctite on the threads here, so we are going to do that as well. So I will place some on our threads before we put on our flange nut. And this flange nut here is going to provide a little bit of traction for us. So now when we tighten it up and then hammer on it, it's not going to be able to vibrate kind of back and forth and not fully seat in. Now it's going to have that extra pressure holding it. And we'll just kind of keep hammering and tightening this down as we go. One other thing you can do is, if you're beating on this and you're not getting it to fully sink in, you can try and tighten down that nut a bunch more and use that to suck it all the way in. And that's what I'm going to do right now, because hitting on this isn't really getting me much further. Now, just if you do over tighten this, you want to make sure that you kind of back it back off and then re-tighten it. So that way it's firm here, but it's not too tight to where the leaf spring can't kind of flow back and forth. We need a little bit of wiggle room here. We don't want the hanger to fully clamp onto our leaf spring eyelet, because then it's not going to be able to move. All right, I am going to torque down the wet bolt here. It's pretty low torque setting, so not too bad. But for the 1/2 inch stuff here, it's going to be even lower. This is essentially just going to clamp on here. We shouldn't see any bending. The spacer between here should prevent that from happening. So we will need a 1/2 inch socket and wrench to tighten these down and then torque those as well. Now that we got this bracket on, I am gonna go ahead and just grease up our wet bolt first, and then we can get our other bracket in place and then start putting in our cross member. That's good. Once you got both brackets in place, now you're gonna want to grab a 9/16 socket and wrench, a torque wrench, and then your 3/8 flange bolts and nuts, and then the two cross member pieces. And you're just going to want to make sure that you have the correct one for the correct bracket. So I've got the smaller one over here. This is my smaller inner piece. The larger piece is going to go over that, so you'll want to probably tighten that one in first, because once we have this in there, it's going to slot up just like that. And when we get that all bolted up on the outer side here, there's going to be 3 and 3 on this side. You can see the holes already lined up here on our bracket. And then you can see once we get these two lined up with each other, the holes will start to match up with within these slots. And what we're going to want to do is hit whatever holes are furthest out on both sides once we have these together. I'm going to switch over. We'll grab that other side here since that's the bigger one. And that one will go in first, and then the bottom is going to be that smaller one, so you can lift it up into there instead of trying to fight over it, just because there's not really a lot of clearance between our underbelly and our bracket here. All right, we'll slip this in place and start putting in our bolts. Once you get a few of them in, it'll help hold itself up. We're going bolt side in, and then the nuts are going to be on the inside here. And I'm just going to thread these on. We're not going to fully tighten them down just yet. Now I'm going to slot in the smaller bracket. And just for stability, I'm going to push one more up into the center to help hold it together while we get the flange nuts onto our bracket bolts. All right, now we're going to have 4 bolts to put on each side, and like I was saying, we want to be at the furthest end we can, so that's going to be right here and here, and then here and here. So pop those bolts in. And do the same on the other side. And we'll finish those off with some flange nuts. Now I'm just going to go by with my ratchet and just snug each one of these down, and then we'll come back with our torque wrench and torque them as well. Now that I have it all snugged down, I'm just going to go back to each bolt and torque it down. If you are torquing down on the nut side, you'll definitely need a 3/8 drive short weld 9/16 socket in order to get into here, just because it is pretty tight. Make sure I got that. So unfortunately on the inside here, even the short weld is not enough on the center, just because the bolts on both sides are lining right up with each other, so there's really only about an inch of space between the two. So you will have to torque on the bolt head side, which really isn't preferred, but it's not the end of the world. Well, I think that does it for our look at and installation of the MORryde X-Factor Crossmember here on our 2023 Palomino Puma Unleashed fifth wheel toy hauler. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right upgrade for your trailer, then please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.